What to you is the primary largest shift that has happened, and where do you see that shift sort of going from a behavioral perspective in terms of how people perceive telehealth and connected health?
The marketing and exposure of virtual care and connected care to consumers and the population en masse has been probably the biggest seismic shift. I think if you were to look at kind of the three big players in healthcare, payers, providers, and patients, the one that had the least exposure across the board was patients, right? Payers have generally sort of had some sort of payment plan reimbursement or discussion around telehealth and virtual care for decades, right? And providers have had a number of different initiatives and sort of lumpy adoption within virtual care, but nobody had really been able to reach the US population, both young and old and sick and healthy, I think in the ways that we're seeing that impact the population today. And I think that will have really broad, far-reaching implications in a very positive way, but also in unexpected ways as it kind of gets released into the wild and I think inserted into the daily delivery and fabric of our society.
As a healthcare delivery provider, perhaps a market view is that there are three forces that tend to triangulate in any industry and drive maturity in that industry: technical capability, regulations, and culture. When it comes to healthcare, technical capability, we have had fairly good technical capability when you talk about the mechanics of providing care, but we have been lagging behind in deploying digital technologies and design thinking to really accelerate what we provide, the quality and the convenience and the value in what we provide. Similarly, regulations have been lagging. Of late, before COVID, the cultural aspect has actually been driving change in healthcare through manifesting through consumerism. But exactly as John's saying, with the advent of COVID, when the federal bodies relaxed some of the use of regulations around use of some technologies and expanded reimbursement, and states followed through with social distancing and working from home or shelter in place, almost instantaneously what we experienced is that care delivery went virtual and care operations now needed to support a mobile workforce. So in a span of a few days, we've gone from predominantly brick and mortar way of thinking to predominantly virtual ways of thinking.
I mean, it's the common language now to say that self-care is a new primary care, but it didn't connect until now that people understand that self-care will come through the phone. And when I'm on phone calls with diaspora from Africa, leaders from here, and with leaders from Africa, it's so clear that the move to somewhere between 80 and 90% coverage of people in Africa with cell phones is transformative there, kind of like the jumping over of the telephone lines. There's a capacity now for Fairview, who has one of the most advanced, not only care delivery, but their company in pharmaceuticals, their innovations within the university itself. This is a global treasure. This is something that can now be shared almost more easily in Nairobi than in Buffalo.
In constitutional law, we call it ratchet theory. That is, once a policy is moved forward, it never moves backwards. That's just not how government tends to work. They don't take things away. So I think what we'll see is with this extreme interest in consumers and a level of comfort that they'll begin to have over the next 9 months of trying this out, both with traditional healthcare from the medical side, but we're also seeing a dramatic shift across the behavioral side. My wife runs a series of 5 clinics here in Northern Virginia, and the number of clinicians who vowed they would never do a telehealth or a telecommunications visit in order to see their patients have now fundamentally shifted what they're doing and fundamentally rethought the way that they even do therapy and talk to their patients. So it's gonna stick.
Just a few weeks ago, our standard protocol would have been, evidence-based protocol would have been to say in condition X, you really need to observe the patient and you have to do it in your facility using these things. We're actively talking about why can't we screen the patient for their ability to care, as Mark was talking about, and provide them support at home. Whether in addition to remote patient monitoring devices, having clinicians at home, whether it's mobile phlebotomists or home care nurses or home care ancillary therapies, etc., with video interaction from a provider. So in terms of the surge, perhaps looking at it a couple of different ways. One is reduce length of stay using digital technologies. The second one is continue. Again, I think, Mark, you have a great statement there, and you say self-care is the new primary care. So delivering the primary, secondary levels of care, continuing to deliver that in virtual means and not bring it back into brick and mortar.
The key is, how do you move it out of that face-to-face or real-time encounter with a physician and put that power, put that experience into the hands of the patient? And that's where we looked outside of healthcare to say, what are the standards? What does Amazon do? What does StubHub do? What does everybody else do already that's in practice, that's battle tested, that we're familiar with, and how can we start to bring those back into the healthcare experience? And I think that's a really good narrative, and that's certainly been our errand here at Zipnosis, is to say, we can start in a good clinical foundation. We can apply basic user experience best practices already outside of healthcare. Now, the nice thing about, I think, I totally agree with David and Raghu, which is now that the regs are changing, we can be more liberal with how we apply these, because I think, honestly, the focus for telemedicine has been around video-based care. And the question I love to ask people was, when was the last time you bought anything on Amazon with a video visit? You haven't, right? And so when you start from that vantage point, you realize how sort of behind the times healthcare has been.
It's likely we'll see some platforms emerge who can solve for that better. And I think the ones who already can, like Zipnosis or others similar who are in the space who've been doing it, actually have a tremendous advantage as this moves forward, because I think they can already demonstrate that they can be a trusted platform, both for consumers and providers. Because I expect that at some point, those security regulations and the desire that HIPAA be enforced will return. We're not going to go backwards on the kinds of privacy and access protections that we've given to consumers, even in this new space. It will simply be a adjustment to how you incorporate those.
For us as a healthcare provider, that trust that our patients put in us to safeguard and maintain and manage their data, keep it private, keep it secure, is paramount to us. So as a healthcare provider, we would always be going for platforms like Zipnosis or others who are HIPAA compliant and are continuing to develop on that side of things, as opposed to completely off-the-shelf software that's probably not HIPAA compliant or not secure enough.
We are moving, what the volume that has flowed through the creaky telemedicine pipes, and I say creaky because a lot of these systems, when you look at even Teladoc, they were never built, and you can't get the math to work for them to do millions and millions and millions of visits every day. They can't do it. And I think what you're going to see here is the need for healthcare to move from these discrete events, right? You have a video visit and it comes back and you do this, to almost this stream of data that is now going to start to happen, right? And that requires a very different way of thinking about regulations. It comes about thinking about privacy. It comes thinking about the technologies that start to support that. And so I think simultaneously, we've seen these kind of start to converge here over the past few weeks. And so I think the regulations, blowing them wide open to the fact that anybody on Facebook or FaceTime can do clinical encounters, I don't think that's going to be permanent. I wouldn't support that. But I think you're going to need to see the regulation support at a national level. You can't go back to the state licensure because it just doesn't make any sense and doesn't support that model. And more importantly, my hope is that people and the regulators start to embrace this idea that a virtual encounter at home, doing things outside of the four walls, is going to be just a part of the overall experience, and start to promote a mode agnostic, sort of data-driven way of looking at regulations instead of this old school sort of model.
I think we're going to see some tighter controls across more platforms in terms of how this data can be encrypted at rest and when it's moving end to end. There are going to be likely new standards for interoperability across a range of IoT devices and a range of platforms that can interact more seamlessly. I think personalization is going to be key. Once these digital technologies come into play, we have the ability to, in real time or near real time, to be able to personalize how we interact with the patient at that point in time to meet their unique needs, whether it's brick and mortar or whether it's virtual. So I think those are the three big things that I see accelerating, manifesting itself in a set of services that are going to be pretty commonplace.
Is that the emotional side of this is going to be really important, because we have seen the fear, right? And as much as we want to talk about like patients and technology and all this, people were wanting assurances, right? They were deadly afraid, and it drove a huge spike. The flip side is, what are we mandated to do? And I think those kind of lumpy, and the more consistency we can have in testing, the more consistency we can have in what we're allowed to do, I think we'll actually have a really big impact in how the technology looks 18 months from now.
The notion that people will come together in large groups for things, probably quite a ways out. People's willingness to go to a very large hospital will probably be quite different than going to a small clinic someplace in their neighborhood, someplace that seems less overwhelming. And so I think that's going to be a change that'll come with a lot of the virtual and the telemedicine. But another part of that is it was a very interesting observation made earlier about how many of us ever look at a video before we buy something from Amazon. But how many of us look at videos after, when we're trying to figure out, like, how do you replace that O-ring? Or wait a minute, how does this work? Or where, so I think we'll begin to see that we'll have different times in different places.
So I think the next 9 months to 2 years, we're going to see sort of a post-traumatic stress disorder component to a lot of major parts of the country. I mean, different people, different companies. I think everyone's going to deal with it in different ways. Certainly first responders who have been in the middle of this are going to have some PTSD kinds of things. And I think these technology tools would be a very effective way to deal with those, on top of any other conditions that are going to emerge over the course of the next little bit.
Great comments, and a really, really important reminder for the fact that our frontline people that are actually attending to this are going to be bearing the brunt of thinking about and being sort of, in some cases, troubled by what they have had to experience really on our behalf as a society. And we, of course, thank them, and for those who are on this call of that frontline type of role or know people in that role, thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts, that we can't repay, for what you're doing on our behalf as society. And I'm sure we all would agree that we would pledge to do our part to look out empathetically for that group of individuals as we all kind of come out of this together.